As we know, God always keeps his promises, so we never have to worry about that. But we do need to make sure that we do what we're supposed to do. We've got to stay in a position where we can receive the promises of God. And we've also got to obey God and follow his directions exclusively. And finally, we may even face opposition. But when we're living according to the word of God and when we're standing on the promises of God, we know that we will always have the victory no matter what comes against us. And I'm so glad to be here for the lesson today. I know that I am posting really late. Typically March and April are really busy months for me, and next week my dad turns 84 and I'm publishing a book of his sermons, so that kind of got a lot of my time this week. But nevertheless, we are here, and let's get into this lesson. It is Joshua, a prophet of conquest. And this story is where we see Joshua picking up the mantle, and a lot has happened from last week to this week, because even though God had promised this land to Abraham, this land was not inhabited. So it's not like they came out of Egypt, went through the wilderness, and they just walked into this land that was already set up for them. That's not how it went. This land was inhabited, and they had to fight their way through. And that's where Joshua was leading the people to possess the land that God had already promised them. And that is a really good lesson to us, because we know that we're standing on the promises of God. But sometimes there's going to be a battle when we are trying to possess the promise that God has for us. And we have to remain steadfast and faithful through those times, knowing that God is with us. And so we see that in this lesson, they are to Jericho. And it says Jericho was shut up. No one was able to leave or come into Jericho because of the children of Israel. And I love that, because they had heard about Joshua and they knew how powerful they were. And that's how we should be as people of God, right? When the enemy hears about us coming, when the enemy knows we're on our way, our enemy should know to brace themselves, because we're coming, and we're coming with power. And sometimes when we look at this in today's society, people don't have any respect for the people of God. Ain't nothing to them. They're not saved. They ain't got no power. But we don't want to be. They want to be like Joshua. When the devil hears you coming, when your enemy hears you coming, know you're on your way, they buckle down and they shut up, because they know that you have the power of God with you. So we see that that's what happened here at Jericho. And so God told Joshua, he said, "See, I have given into thine hand Jericho, and the king thereof, and the mighty men of valor." This is God talking to Joshua, telling him that he had delivered the city. So Joshua went into this battle already knowing the outcome. And that's how we live our lives every single day. When we go into battle, we already know that we're victorious. So we have to face every challenge, every obstacle, every battle with that mindset. God already gave this to me. I got this. God is with me. God has promised this to me. And so we see that that's what Joshua did. And so then one thing I love about the Old Testament is God was so specific in his instructions. He told Joshua exactly what to do. He said, you're going to take 7 priests, and then you're going to take 7 horns, and then you're going to march around the city one time for 6 days, okay, and encompass the city. And so then he said, but on the 7th day, you're going to go around the city 7 times. And when you blow the horns, the people are going to shout and the walls are going to fall down. How powerful is that? And so I love the way that they always write this in the Old Testament, because there's one set of verses where it tells you specifically what God is telling them to do. And then the next set of verses is where they do things exactly the way that God told them to do. And they get the result exactly the way that God told them that it would happen. That is such a beautiful example of how God works on our behalf. And one thing that, again, is really jumping out to me here is that they followed God's directions. And conversely, in the passages in the Old Testament where they did not follow God's direction, those passages that say, and once again, the children did evil in the sight of the Lord. So we see the stark contrast of what happens when you follow God's directions as opposed to what happens to when you don't follow God's directions. And it could not be any more simpler. Follow God's direction and you'll be victorious. So simple. That's all we have to do. That's all that God is requiring us to do. And it says the walls fell down and they were able to just go into the city and to possess it. And this is the confirmation or the manifestation of the promise that God had made to Abraham so many years prior. And we're here and we have this word of God and we have this whole Bible full of all of these promises of God for us to live by, for us to stand on, for us to know what God has already provided for us. God is the creator and he has provided everything for us. All we have to do is live according to the word of God, follow his instruction and manifest the promises of God. I am standing on the promises of Jesus and I believe that he'll do just what he said. And that's what we have to do. It doesn't matter. I mean, just imagine, again, I say this all the time. We're reading these stories, right? But let your mind really get into this story. You're out here in this wilderness and you come up to a walled city. Okay. Think of the biggest, thickest walled city that you know. Here in Chicago, there's a building. I'm a Chicago architect fanatic. I guess it's the nerd in me, but there's a building here called the Monadnock building. And it doesn't sit on a steel frame. It sits on the base. It's a high rise. And the base of the building has walls that are 6 feet thick. And I love it when I walk into that building. You know how you have revolving doors? You can see that you're walking through walls that are 6 feet thick. Now, the walls of Jericho were so thick until there were actually houses built on a wall. So this is not no little skimpy prefab drywall wall. No, this is a solid wall built to fortify the city. So when they went inside this city and they shut themselves up, they were presumed to be safe. They figured that long as we stay in and we don't go out, we're all good. But they didn't realize the power and the promise of God. I just felt that they didn't realize the power in the promise of God. Do you realize the power in the promise of God? Because those walls fell down. Have you ever had an experience where you had this huge, seemingly insurmountable obstacle in front of you? You don't know what you're going to do. You don't know how you're going to do it. And you just pray about it and you just keep living right and you just keep doing right and you just keep studying your word, and all of a sudden the problem just dissipates right before your very eyes. I've had that experience in my life, which is why can't nobody tell me nothing about God. There is nothing that can turn me away or make me not believe in him, make me not trust him. And so we see that God kept his promise. And see, God is no respecter of persons. So if he kept this promise to Abraham, he is going to keep this promise to us. And part of the promise to Abraham was that all of the world, all of the nations of the world would be blessed by his seed. And I'm included in all of the nations of the world. And I am blessed by what God did here on this day. And I know that he will do it for me. A prophet of conquest. That is how Joshua allowed God to use him. How are you allowing God to use you today? What are you going to go and conquer this week? See, we've got to shift our perspective, change our mindset. Stop saying, I got these problems. Stop saying, I've got to go through this. I got to suffer through this. No, I'm going to go conquer this. Whatever is happening, this is just another opportunity. It's not a problem. It's just an opportunity for God to manifest the power of his promise in my life. And so that is what we're talking about here today. So as you go about your week, and these are very, very challenging times every day, there seems to be a new twist to what's going on, but that's okay because God's in control. God is leading us. God is guiding us. All you have to do is stand on the word of God and follow his directions and watch him manifest the power of his promise in your life.